Well, I think institutional adoption of Bitcoin was inevitable.
The difference is institutional adoption of Bitcoin is only good for the institution. Your window of time is extremely small, 21 million. No one's going to make more of it. 90% of it is already mined and owned. For all of those who are obsessed with the number go up, if you really want to see that number go up, you have to self-custody the Bitcoin, because at least you know that it's real, what it is that you're holding. The reason why the number doesn't go up is because there's a lot of BS out there in terms of product. It's not real Bitcoin. If it was real Bitcoin, every person talking Bitcoin needs to show proof of reserves. If they don't show it, how do you know they have it? All of these products and services are created, in my opinion, to keep 8.3 billion people dependent on a system that was created to enslave, surveil, and control. These are not products created to set anyone free.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for being part of this, and thank you very much to the organization for inviting us to be part of this incredible conference. It's my first time in BTC Prague. Well, let's jump into business, because this panel will be mainly about geopolitics, how Bitcoin plays or doesn't play a role in it. And I would like to start maybe with you, Natalie. Let's jump into it. There's a lot of raw states like Venezuela. I'm from Venezuela, so obviously I know that they are using Bitcoin. There's Iran, there's China, there's a lot of alternative countries using Bitcoin right now to evade sanctions, to try to do their business outside of Western control. So I would like to know, what do you think that this kind of use of Bitcoin, this use case of these raw nations does to Bitcoin? Do you think that it taints it, or do you think that it's the actual nature of Bitcoin? So what are your thoughts about these guys using Bitcoin?
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here for my first BTC Prague as well. Bitcoin is a neutral technology. So it means that it's for sovereign nations to use for better or worse. It's for individuals to use for better or for worse. And I think that ultimately this is just a part of the adoption cycle of Bitcoin. So because it's neutral, you can choose to self-custody it. You can choose to send it wherever you'd like. And that, of course, means that no one can sanction you. No one needs to be asked for permission. And so unfortunately, sometimes that makes Bitcoin, the network, look bad, right? Oh, it's being used by criminals, it's being used by nations to subvert the financial system. But actually, this is the feature of the network, the fact that it is decentralized and permissionless and open source and available for all of us to use, especially in a system that has broken our trust. And I think that it's a signpost to see nations like even Iran accepting Bitcoin for tolls. There's an insurance program that's been reported for the Strait of Hormuz. So we're seeing Bitcoin being used at the sovereign level more and more, and I think it's just a sign of what's to come.
Yeah, and by any chance, if you want to add anything to this first topic, obviously you are more than welcome, Tony, Rahim, or Jack. I don't know if you, please, Rahim.
Yes, I think the risk obviously was there of it being tainted, as with every technology. Now, Bitcoin is a narrative and a technology. Interestingly, it's mostly in the West that there's interest in the narrative. So in most of the world, it's a technology, and a technology can be used by everyone, of course. So from the early days of Silk Roads, I was always afraid that it'll be tainted by the shadiest use cases. And I think another shady use case was crypto, and it survived. That's crypto use cases. And I think we are past the phase where it has already survived it being tainted by the use of rogue nations. And one reason that this usage was stronger than you would have expected is that, of course, in particular, these rogue nations don't have an interest that their citizens use Bitcoin as a technology. They want to control. Of course, they want to avoid the control by the big bullies on the geopolitical scene, but they were never ready to really have free use of that technology. And that, in a way, has helped push it to a phase where it's hopefully already too late because it's big enough, it's prominent enough. It has been adopted in the West to a degree as a narrative and a technology and interesting economic business or industry. That I think we're over that phase. So if that would have happened, the Hormuz Strait payments 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I'd be much more worried than it happening now. And we see there's very little backlash. So that's already a sign that probably we are past that phase. And surprisingly, again, Bitcoin has survived even that kind of worst case adoption.
Okay, and maybe we can go a little deeper into the neutrality of it, because obviously what we are trying to say is that it's open and it's for everyone, as in Natalie's book, obviously, and then it seems like this neutrality is being somehow abused. I'm not sure if you would agree that it's a good term to say it, but if it's that neutral and we as Bitcoiners understand that it's open for everyone, but still like there's a reputational risk in there that maybe that neutrality could be taken as something that opens it's open for criminals and so on. So maybe we can dive a little into that. What does that neutrality means? Yeah, Tony.
I'll take that. Bitcoin changes the rules of the game, the international rules of the game surrounding money. There is no more policing the money now that something like Bitcoin exists. This whole narrative about, it's for criminals, tainted use, reputational risk, all of that are narratives by a system who is threatened by a neutral playground that has never existed before. Bitcoin is peer-to-peer electronic cash that is uncontrollable by any living soul, no matter what you think of them. Whether they're good people, ugly people, bad people, it doesn't matter. You cannot stop anyone from adopting and using Bitcoin. The day money, or what we thought was money, became weaponized against individuals and nation states is the day it died. Bitcoin was created to put an end to the abuse. There's no sugarcoating this. Bitcoin was created for one purpose and one purpose only: the separation of money and state. That has to end before the world can become a better place again. So when you have countries like Iran adopting it, your opinion of Iran doesn't matter because they are serving their own interests just as they have the right to do as a sovereign nation. And every other country has the same right to do that. Narratives trying to sway people's opinions is what we hear about in the media. But the fundamental truth is that Bitcoin is neutral, available for nation states, available for 8.3 billion individuals. Some forces don't want you to know this or understand that this is an option. They want you to believe that you need their permission to use something that was created to set you free. That is the narrative that must be ignored because it's not true. And it's going to take a little bit of time and, unfortunately, a lot more pain for people to cement that understanding that you have to stop asking for permission. You have to stop waiting for approval. You have to stop waiting for regulation or clarity acts or things of that sort. Bitcoin doesn't care. It wasn't meant to play in that world. It was created to replace it, to give the world an alternative that is no longer abusable.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we talk about the Iran start to use Bitcoin as a tool for the Strait of Hormuz. It's a good beginning. However, we don't know exactly how much amount they already collect by people paying the Bitcoin. But definitely, this is a very good example of starting for sovereign nation, especially they are kind of in the ambiguity. They cannot use the US dollar. They also don't want to use maybe Chinese yuan, whatever. So I think at least this is a good trigger for people to think about. Bitcoin can be used for this kind of sovereign nation, especially during the period of the real war. However, I was think, as I say, I mean, how much Iran really utilize Bitcoin to collect as a toll, or maybe doing other thing, we don't know yet. However, we got to think about because of those real war from the Russia, Ukraine, and now the Iran, and then we can see the centralized power, for example, leading by US and the NATO, versus like Iran, China, and Russia. Indeed, we are living in a more, you can see from those real war over the last few years, it's more centralized power control the world, control what people even, in economy, including in like the Middle East. Okay, so however, don't forget, Bitcoin is the internet native money, okay? So what I'm trying to say is that centralized powers, indeed, they are more centralized, they are more control what they want for the money. And at least you see country like Iran, they won't reject the Bitcoin, or even they try to use Bitcoin. So look at the other side. I think it's more important. Let's look at the bottom up. The internet native economy. We are living in the internet world, right? We can do whatever the similar thing everywhere in the world, regardless where we are. So the internet economy indeed is already growing a lot. So in this kind of Bitcoin is an internet native money, I think it's growing. It's growing. It's, like what people say, individual sovereignty, and those things you can use it without those big power, centralized big power control. So I think we are on the way. We are on the way, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's at the core of the geopolitical transformation that we are in now, this transformation from a unipolar to a multipolar order. And the question is, why hasn't it already happened? Or people would have expected that the BRICS and so on to be already the replacement with other rails. And the reason, of course, is the strong network effect of those rails, the access to markets, the access to win-win exchange. That's still quite dominant. Of course, the payment rails have been politicized, and that's one of the biggest appeals of Bitcoin. I totally agree here, but the war is not won because it's this trade-off that's pretty strong still. I mean, in the current situation, Russia should be the main beneficiary of rising oil prices, but the access to markets, of course, limits that situation. And then, of course, the trade-off to switch onto alternative payment rails, which is not just the Internet of Money story, it's really the neutral inter-block kind of payment story. That hasn't fully emerged yet. So I think it's one of the most interesting stories at the time. Everyone feels we're in the transformation phase. Obviously, the protocols of exchange of market access should be at the core of it. But the war is not over, and we see a surprising strength of even despite this abuse of the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, still this dominance of these rails and these market accesses. And why been dominant for such a while is that every now and then on the market there emerges an additional layer, and it was in the past the Eurodollar, which is like an estimated too little understood extra layer that was like unregulated dollar rails that allowed you access. Then I think it's the Tether story. That's a kind of new Eurodollar, which also I think too little understood and reported how important that was. I think right now the US under Trump, we're trying to become friendly towards Bitcoin, and then crypto, of course, also tried to move that part within the control and jurisdiction of the US again. And then we'll see if something else emerges, and another way to access that system without being completely under its control. And of course, all our hopes are for Bitcoin to be that one thing, but it hasn't happened yet. Let's be realistic about that. That's still what's happening now, and what makes this time and this asset so interesting.
Okay, now that we have, I think that I also agree that it doesn't really matter if these nations are using Bitcoin, obviously, and I think that we are all are in the similar thinking, but just maybe looking into the institutional capital that is already now taking over Bitcoin, or that is now looking into Bitcoin as an interesting investment vehicle. do you think that someone that is investing in IBITs, BlackRock IBITs ETF, or that is using Bitcoin just to have exposure to the price or something like that, really is really getting the same kind of usage or the same kind of utility that it brings to these raw nations, or it's still like the same openness that we've been saying, that it's so open that even the suits could use it? So maybe we can dive into it. I don't know, Natalie, maybe you. What do you think? Are they going to be scared or?
Well, I think institutional adoption of Bitcoin was inevitable. And I think that if you're going to look at it from a positive lens, it's an on-ramp, especially for pension funds, for pools of capital that can't easily allocate to spot Bitcoin. It makes it easy for mom and pop investors that are used to a traditional brokerage account, but it isn't true Bitcoin. And I think someone sitting next to me will be able to tell you why you should invest in spot Bitcoin and self-custody it, because he's seen the worst sides of the weaponization of the monetary system and how it can disenfranchise the average person. But I think that, again, this is just part of the adoption phase. And most people, when they're just starting out, self-custody is very intimidating. And they've put a lot of trust in these institutions as intermediaries. And at least in the US, that trust comes with the idea that there is a rule of law and there are compliance systems in place that protect you in some way. Now, of course, again, we know that spot Bitcoin is the only thing that truly protects you. It's the only thing that makes you sovereign. But when you're new, the idea of being your own bank and making a single mistake that could cause you to lose your life savings it can be scary. So I think it's an education process. I didn't start out right away with self-custody. I had to kind of go through the steps, really understand it, learn that it is for everyone and it's easy to do. But I think because we're trying to really get the masses in, we should celebrate the fact that people are accumulating in some way, getting some exposure, and having an incentive to learn about Bitcoin to hopefully eventually take self-custody. And we need to protect the ability to take self-custody, because there are policymakers out there that probably want that to be banned or limited in some way. And we need to do everything possible to educate policymakers as well, so that we protect the right to self-custody, so that we can be truly sovereign. And if the worst case scenario happened, like it did in Tony's life, you can flee with your money and with the ability to protect yourself and start over somewhere else.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, institutional adoption is just part of Bitcoin's story. It's unavoidable. Again, just like any nation-state adoption, whether you agree with it, like it or not, it doesn't matter. Everybody has the right to get into Bitcoin. The difference is institutional adoption of Bitcoin is only good for the institution. It's not good for anyone who thinks the institutional products have any value. These products are not Bitcoin, like at all. These are just other legacy financial concoctions, no different from what we have normally in the legacy system. You don't own anything, you don't have the right to anything, and at any given point in time, you can be kicked out for any reason. And if you want to make a profit, the only profit you're making is in debasing paper. So it's not Bitcoin. All of these products and services are created, in my opinion, to keep 8.3 billion people dependent on a system that was created to enslave, surveil, and control. These are not products created to set anyone free. The only product that's out there as a ticket for freedom is Bitcoin, in your control, 100%. It wasn't meant for institutional help. You don't need anybody's help. Bitcoin self-custody might be intimidating at first because it comes from the tech world. I get that. But no one on this planet, in my view, is too dumb to learn a few steps. It just takes the confidence and the expertise, like the guidance of people who understand this, to walk you through it. And then once you've mastered it, repeated it a few times, it's no different than getting in your car and going for a drive or making a cup of coffee. It becomes as autopilot as something you've been doing your entire life. However, the change it makes in your everyday existence, the power it puts back into your control, knowing that no living soul can kick you out of your own hard-earned time and energy, is something no fiat product will ever give you, because it wasn't created for that purpose. It was created to keep you dependent on a system that has no good intentions towards you or your freedom or your opinions or your privacy. So every one of us has an option now. As of 2009, the entire legacy system, in my opinion, has become optional. But there is a crazy push to ensure that as few people as possible understand and know about this. But it doesn't stop Bitcoin. And every day, I see its adoption growing a lot. Merchants accepting it, using it as money, earning it as income, opting out of a system that has no good incentives other than those of threat and coercion. So again, self-custody is the Bitcoin revolution. It's the neutral ground that no living soul can manipulate its rules. That's game over in that world.
And the Bitcoin Way is a great company to walk you through it. Someone holding your hand, because sometimes you need that.
Absolutely. We do this 24/7. You would be hard-pressed to meet a more OCD team out there that does this. I mean, we bring in 25 years of cybersecurity into this mix. You will never get this wrong, and you will get it right the first time.
Yeah, either Rahim or Jack. Yeah, Jack, please.
Maybe one word only. You want?
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, let me be even more critical than you are, and they'll be difficult. You mentioned it as an on-ramp, the institutional adoption, and I think the same thing was said about crypto being an on-ramp to Bitcoin. And the problem is, of course, that in a large part, it then becomes a number go up place and replacement bet. And I think the shitcoins of this phase were this kind of institutional adoption, the ETFs, the IBITs, the Bitcoin treasury companies, and so on, in a good way. So it replaced some shitcoin dynamics we would have had otherwise, but also in a very bad way. And I think that's the main reason why we see now in a time of geopolitical uncertainty going up, not the Bitcoin price go up, which should be logical. I mean, it's the most location-independent, mobile, sovereign form of liquidity. There should be a run on it. It's not happening because this kind of institutional adoption has become a number go up game for a risk-on asset. So now we have lots of people that consider it still as a risk-on asset. And then, of course, geopolitical uncertainty darkens the outlook. You have all this uncertainty to price into every exotic, risky asset. And I think we've seen the trade-off that a lot of the more recent entrants into Bitcoin are only the number go up tourists. And that is, of course, now hindering this longer-term adoption. Bitcoin will survive that anyway, but I think it's not always a good idea to cheer for that kind of on-ramps and adoption. And some of it is a symptom and, of course, necessary, and some of it provides value. There is some value in custody for other people because it's a different, difficult thing. Not everyone has such good advisors as you, maybe, but that's no longer the case. That is really that the use value in that it's a lot of hope to be early and the front running in a risky asset.
Let me add a few seconds to this. For all of those who are obsessed with the number go up, if you really want to see that number go up, you have to self-custody the Bitcoin, because at least you know that it's real, what it is that you're holding. The reason why the number doesn't go up is because there's a lot of BS out there in terms of products. It's not real Bitcoin. If it was real Bitcoin, every person talking Bitcoin needs to show proof of reserves. If they don't show it, how do you know they have it? Bitcoin is about verify, don't trust, right? Okay, so if you want the number to go up, the more people who self-custody that Bitcoin, 21 million, the scarcity, organically, mathematically, it's going to happen. The quicker more people understand this, the sooner we get to that number go up, if that's what everybody's after. But I can tell you that the number go up is the most useless metric in Bitcoin because it's completely unrelated to what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is money. Number go up obsession is because you're treating it as a stock. That's not what it is. It's not something you buy to make more dollars or euros or more worthless paper. Bitcoin is the money. You think of it as a sovereign country. That's its currency. That's what it uses. It's a savings technology that's going to appreciate in value because it's protected by math and cryptography, not by corrupt human individuals.
Okay, Jack,
Yeah, maybe 1 minute only. I would say, I agree with what Tony said. Bitcoin is the perfect money, the sound money. However, because my opinion will be we will got a two-step approach, okay? Because now we are still living in, let's say, over 90% of the wealth globally maybe is still being held on the institution, on the corporate, right? So, I wish those institutional money, they can more buy Bitcoin, more BlackRock, more MicroStrategy, now even also digital credit, right? So more of those money can be deployed to buy Bitcoin, yes. And the number will go up, Bitcoin price will go up, and then more and more individual, they will realize, Bitcoin is the must-own asset, either directly or indirectly through IBIT, through MSTR, through STRC, etc. So I think, yes, number need to go up, and then it will draw people attention. Maybe put away a little bit more on the AI stock, and then back to the Bitcoin stock, back to Bitcoin itself. So I think when the Bitcoin go to 1 million, let's say, because of those institutional money that go to 1 million or higher, I think more and more people will do self-custody. That's the real what Bitcoin should be. Okay.
Okay, now I want to, because we have just 10 minutes, and I think that this like the best part of the panel. I obviously wanted to go through the geopolitical situation because we see countries using Bitcoin. Now we touch a little about the suits using Bitcoin. Now we are going into the individuals using Bitcoin because obviously we want to survive the Great Reset. That's the panel, what the panel is about. So there's this neutrality that we already discussed, the importance of self-custody, these other ways or options that these fiat products opens for it and opens new doors for people to actually use Bitcoin and gain exposure to it, even though they are not holding the actual coin. But still, like, what are your thoughts on these like multiple and different kind of users that are and how the individuals can learn from their experience? For example, I'm coming from Venezuela, so obviously for me, it was a surviving tool because we had hyperinflation, then people trying to rob you through the inflation control and debasing the money. So I experienced all of that, and I value Bitcoin because it's outside of that. But that's my personal view because what I lived through. But maybe seeing this use case from the Strait of Hormuz, the STRC guys using it to build digital credit and so on, what is there for the individuals? What the sovereign individuals surviving this Great Reset can achieve through Bitcoin? Natalie?
I think it's most critical to educate the everyday person. That's what I've found to be my mission, because so many people are struggling and they don't know why. And I can relate because I was there. And even though I was educated, got my master's degree, was working at these high-powered news networks, I didn't understand the most important thing, which was what money really is, how it works, why it matters who issues it, and it matters what the supply is and whether the supply can change. And that confusion led me down the path of getting political. And I thought that the solution came from government. I thought that we needed more intervention, that we needed wealth redistribution. And you're seeing a lot of this populist kind of uprising and outcries around the world because people are frustrated that their work is no longer being rewarded. and they can't save for the future, they can't start families, and especially young people are feeling this increasing pressure on them. And they're the people who need Bitcoin the most. And when we zoom out at sort of the geopolitical level of this, I think we're seeing an intensifying battle between the forces of freedom and the forces of control. And we're seeing increasing tension between the material ledger, the physical world, and the financial ledger, which is basically made up of paper money that we can never pay back, that we owe ourselves, right? It's crazy that we don't understand this. We don't get this fundamental education in school. And Bitcoin is what led me to this knowledge. And it allowed me to see the world in a different way and appreciate that even in the best of systems, even in the country with the reserve currency, the money is so broken that we no longer have a sense of hope for the future. We no longer have a strong middle class, and people feel like they're working harder than ever only to fall behind. If that's happening in America, where we have the best currency and everything else is inflating at faster rates than the dollar, you can see how the world is shifting in such a fundamental way. And now that the unipolar power is being challenged, I think we're going to see more breaking across the world in so many ways. We're going to see an increase in geopolitical conflict, and we're going to see more people crying out for the very thing that's actually going to hurt them, which is more government control. And that's why I think it's so important to teach them about Bitcoin, because it teaches them about so many important things. It teaches them about freedom, what it really means, what capitalism really is, what free markets really are. And I agree with what Jeff Booth says, which is that we've never lived in a free market before, and we have the first chance to do so with Bitcoin. And it's going to take us a while to get there, but I can only imagine what a world of hope and abundance and prosperity that will be for the average person, based on the work and the service that you provide, being rewarded and measured correctly, and not in a system that's corrupt at its core.
Yeah, Rahim, please.
Yeah. That's beautifully said. That's beautifully said.
Rahim.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Two countries that are in the midst of the geopolitical turmoil now, I know quite well for biographic reasons. That's Lebanon and Iran. And there's more Bitcoin adoption than in most Western countries, but surprisingly little compared to the appeal and promise of Bitcoin. And the reason for that is the main adoption of Bitcoin so far has been as a savings technology, which is also the main interesting thing for in privileged countries. It's the main unsolved issues. We don't have unsolved payment issues, or most people don't have them day to day. In those countries, very few people have savings. And for many people, being a sovereign individual is something scary. If you have that kind of sovereignty, usually the first advice is not look at your savings, is get out of these places. That's why Lebanon, Iran have a huge diaspora. The most sovereign, the most individualistic, the most entrepreneurial people have found a way to get out of the country. And that comes first. That's also the reason why the sovereign individual, the book, which was a bit prophetic about Bitcoin, about the internet money, comes from it from the perspective of a tool for mobility. And the main freedom technology is mobility. It's taking advantage that if you're able to go to a place where you are treated better or treated best, and Bitcoin would serve very well as a tool in that toolkit, as a location-independent liquidity to help you achieve that goal, to make use of that mobility. For reasons of technology, for reasons of the geopolitical order, has increased, and it's one of the most positive stories in the past, that the world is still more open than it used to be in the past. And I think it must lead to that understanding how important Bitcoin could be as a tool, making use of that mobility and being a sovereign individual or a sovereign family, which I like more as the perspective and focus.
Bitcoin is the 8th or 9th revolution of this world, in my view. In the same way that electricity, completely changed the way we live, and the way gunpowder changed, the way people, go to war and what have you, Bitcoin is going to change the definition of money itself. And it's going to set us back into a world where personal responsibility actually means something, where dependence on third parties is no longer a thing. How you get into Bitcoin is your choice. You can get into it through forward thinking, or you can get into it through one of the worst, most extreme forms of pain and annihilation, like the story that I lived through in Lebanon when I woke up overnight, literally homeless, when the entire country was rug pulled by the government and the banks there. If your life is getting worse and more expensive, there's a reason for it. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. There are people responsible for that misery. There's a system in place that was created to ensure that this happens. Bitcoin was the solution to put an end to it. You just have to learn about it and to take the time to read up about it, to understand that this is not a joke. This is not internet funny money. This is not something that's going to be a fad that's going to disappear. In fact, if you look at the headlines today, all the wrong people understand Bitcoin. And so your window of time is extremely small. 21 million. No one's going to make more of it. 90% of it is already mined and owned. The more you give up your funds to institutions, the less you give up of your freedom willingly. I don't think that's a smart strategy. And I think it's coming from a place where people simply don't understand enough of what this thing represents. So I strongly urge anyone who's still sitting on the fence to pick up a good book. Natalie writes a brilliant one that's extremely easy to read. There's nothing technical about it. It's simple English. Bitcoin is money that has been an option since 2009 for 8.3 billion people. You do not have to live in a world that was created to abuse you. You can already take the steps to move into the future of where I think we are headed. Sound money, incorruptible by any living soul.
Well, we have just 20 seconds. It was a really great pleasure to host this panel. Just a final thought, Satoshi didn't create a company. He created a protocol with, as Tony just said, a sound money attached to it. So use that. Obviously, you have other ways, or maybe your risk profile is different, but at the end, what really matters is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is self-custody. Bitcoin in your pocket, not in the pocket or of the orange tie guys. So thank you very much, guys, and really appreciate the time.